Jaz mislim, da naš mikrofon ni povezan, ne? How about now? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's really I hope everything's good. Yeah, I think it will work. They just have to find a way how to put it in. Because I think it's not where our problem. It's not lying with us. It will be fun to have a parallel conversation outside. Yeah. See, I just take mine. I think now we're talking like they're just like here, let's speak together. Let's see, I can hear Boyana. Maybe you do it without us. Oh God, it's so funny to see my fucking screen over there. Yeah, I think you should put it down. It's very difficult in that way to lecture. Yeah, I'm just going to be reading a little bit and then we'll figure it out. And we are so big, you know, it's not fair, you know. You're huge. Are you in Lebanon? Or, yeah. I was just in Frankfurt, there was this Lebanese festival.
Kaj pa mikrofon, da tam...
Yeah.
Kaj pa same as system?
Yeah. It was nice. Some things were really nice. It was really good. Yeah.
Can you hear us now, maybe? No, no. Boyana?
Ne, mora biti ta mic, mora biti.
Kaj pa tukaj, ko imaš to, ne?
Speaker tudi, ker speakerje slišimo, ne? A veš, speaker je tle in slišimo njih, ne? Sam mikrofone ne pobira, ne vem.
Select the microphone. A Boyana, slišiš?
Ja, slišim. Super.
Ampak vsi smo dali isto, ne?
Ne, ni Black Magic.
Kaj pa je?
Microphone array.
Okay.
I'm happy to say that we found the right click on the display, so I'm very sorry, but welcome. We tried it before and it worked, and of course now it didn't. Rafat and then Aida. Is it okay with you with this order, or do you have any? Yeah? Okay. Okay.
So I am the first.
Yes, if it's okay. Yeah? It has been a really nice conference. This is the last act of the formal program. After this, we conclude, and tomorrow is just the picnic and performance. I'm sorry, Rafat, you cannot be with us, and also you, Boyana, but...
It's like it is.
Hello.
Hi. Boyana, we caught, I think, the last nice days in Ljubljana. It's cold during the night, but it's still warm during the day.
Yeah, like here, it's these beautiful autumn days, huh? Yeah, it's nice also for the walks and workshops. Super nice. Yeah, it's really a pity that I cannot be there, but we'll manage. Now I see you well, all three of you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to take a minute to refill my pieces for reading. I'll be back.
Zelo fajn, mislim, so far so good, recimo, zelo fajn. Mislim, da je seveda tudi prejela to, da to ni prejšte, ki je bilo popoldne in popoldne, ki sem to videl. Da se mi tudi v tem pogledu zdi, da je zaključiti, ne. Mislim, tako on its peak, ne, je bilo 80, ampak te je... Ne vem, jaz pričakujem danes 40-50. Pol je pa tudi ful odvisno, ne vem, ene stvari, ko so ne bila Alenka Čupančič, je bilo tudi ful nekih domačih gostov. Ok. Sam ne zaspremeniti. Zdaj delam.
Ja, sam tebe slišam. Ker ta mikrofon zdaj dela. Veš, to je malo problem.
Aha, okej.
A to si ti spremenil, se to je bilo prej verjetno, ne?
Pašti, v Zoomu smo spremenili, ne? Če greš v Zoom, v audio je dala nekaj array.
Tukaj, ko pritisneš, ne?
Puščica.
Sem jaz pritisnila na mikrofon array.
Sam to ne vem, kaj je.
Prej je bilo pa na...
To je ta, to je zunanji mikrofon.
Kje?
Z tega.
Od tega. Kaj pa, če damo same system?
To smo zaprobali.
Če bi probamo še tukaj.
Dela sem bil v bistvu sam ta mikrofon, ko sem...
Greš ti gor čekirat, bom probal še to varianto.
Kaj pa, če sem probamo, če ona dva tudi govorite, če se sliši? Ker sem bo, če se iz dvorane dovolj sliši.
Če bi kaj pa zdaj zanimljivo.
Ja, samo ona dva morate slišati tudi njih, ne? Ajde. Mislim, ne moram.
Zdaj probamo, greš gor, če to dela. Ja, ne vem, probimo še ne hitro to.
A poskusim? Ne, zdaj dela, ne? So, ako mikrofon predam. So, welcome at the last roundtable of the RESHAPE conference, the roundtable on decolonization, degrowth and art. Welcome everybody here and everybody on Zoom following us in the live transmission. We have with us also Boyana and Rafat. You can see them on screen, and although before it worked, now it doesn't work, so we will do a quite complex choreography of changing seats. So Boyana and Rafat will be able to hear us. I will try to choreograph the changes, but please bear with me that we manage to hear each other. So it's been a great week and conference, and the topic that we will tackle today is not an evergreen, as Thea Reba called disobedience and art yesterday, but rather an urgent theme that does not get on the agenda and actions enough. Yesterday's great roundtable has already paved the way for this one, in a way. I think especially Amanda Pina and Jascha Pureber already kind of steered the debate into today's topic. I feel, in a way, very humbled by the vastness of the topic and by all the speakers. So today we'll try to explore the speakers' take on decolonization and degrowth in arts world. So some of the questions that we challenged them before was, how is the concept and practice of degrowth different from aspirations for sustainable practices? Also, where do decolonization and degrowth intersect? Because when we were devising the roundtable together, it seemed urgent and logical to us that we have both in the same table, not separate. Both terms, decolonization and degrowth, both imply some sort of undoing. So what we were especially interested to hear was what's the affirmative side of coin and the both processes, not to be aware or hesitant of practices or of undoing and reparation. I think this is important to say, but maybe there is a different approach to establishing new processes or actions that can build the new, the systems that are not based on growth and exploitation. And maybe you can refer to examples of it. And I think you were all chosen because you were already doing it. No?
Yes.
Yes.
Of course.
Okay. My wish is that we stay connected to the art a bit in the title, and that we try to keep the discussion always in the relation also to the arts world. The format will be that we hear the speakers first and then open a debate. But of course, if you have a very, very urgent question after each intervention, please let me know. So I will present the first speaker and then invite him to change the seat with me so you can start. Okay. So Adel Esadani is an expert in cultural policy and an activist for human rights. He advocates for the inclusion of culture in public development policies. He's the co-founder of Racine, and its general coordinator as of April 2015. He's also the co-founder of the African Cultural Policy Network and a member of its steering committee. He's also the founder of the new Racine, and Racine that now operates in Belgium and in Morocco. We know him personally from a project we were doing together, Transmaking, where Racine was a partner but is not anymore, since the first Racine does not exist anymore. So please.
Thank you. And thank you first for giving me the opportunity to do my psychoanalysis group. It's good for me. I'll speak briefly about the two words, decolonization and degrowth, because I come from a context where we need decolonization and where we need degrowth. And so while we are doing things where we think we are useful, often we don't think about what we are doing, why we are doing it, and especially for who we do it. It's good to do a stop time to time. We take the posture of those who know, who spend their lives criticizing politicians, and some colleagues, of course, artists and so on. But we very quickly, we see it, fall in trap. We use words, concepts, new concepts, old concepts that we warm up, and we don't do the work to generate our knowledge, and it's the first step for decolonization. So about decolonization, I think we need more now, more than before, to make mistakes. And I'm speaking about our mistakes, not other mistakes or mistakes of the others. Reflecting on what we do is part of this process of decolonization that not all of us has started. Think first about impact and how to do them and sustain them in our context. And first of all, what impact we want. Think about the reception and the appropriation of the population. This is anthropology, since we want to change some values that are holding us back. Think about how to work collectively with others and not stay only between us. Make our own assessment as activists in our respective countries. It's true that our governments don't help us in several countries to do this. They want to control everything, shape everything. And funding is a form of control since our governments have not yet understood that their duty is also to provide those who say bad things about them and not only those who say good things. In several underdeveloped countries, there are foreign foundations who give finance, and if you have the chance to be in a rich country, public institutions too. But both do not often have the same objectives or do not always work for the same public. Decolonization begins with ourselves as a producer of contents which we are useful to reshape, while not making the givers of lessons. So the job is to be as close as possible to the audiences we want to reach, and it's not often the case. Simplify without being simplistic, give pleasure, play, and laugh, as we say yesterday, which often corresponds to our nature and not to that of the colonialist. We love fiesta. We Mediterranean people and you, Eastern people, are more attracted to the outdoors, to the public space. So let's get closer to the population by doing theater, music, dance. It's what we do in public space, for example, and internet is too, also a public space. And to start, we need a lot of group psychoanalysis like this one. We must start to reshape ourselves and better to organize collectively to get there, perhaps. As the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze said, the system wants us to be sad, and we have to come to be happy to resist it. About the growth, I'll be brief. To be very practical, I want to tell you about a trap that many of us fall and have fallen to, each with a serious reason or excuse. Our governments keep praising the creative industries. It creates jobs, they said. It gives a good image of the country. It attracts investors. It creates soft power, and blah, blah. Meanwhile, we forget, they make us forget, that before arriving at the stage of the creative industries, we must ensure the public service, the one in which private capital cannot invest, because it's about human and social development, not very profitable for business. But it's the duty of our governments, there is where public money, our taxes, should go. The value chain of cultural policies begins with this public service. Education, I am speaking about my context. It's begin with education in art at school, not only to make artists, but also, and above all, to future clients of creative industries. Also, artistic, technical, and administrative training of the cultural jobs, when the only training that exists are not free or public without quality, they favor one category of the population and cause a breach of equality. And it's where the cynicism of our governments is. It's only at the end of the chain that we come to the creative industry. The music majors, big labels, Netflix, and so on, don't need our activism. We have to defend the status of the artist, the rights of authors, which are not as universal as we think. In short, we don't want growth, we want development, human, social, and after that, economic, if you have time and energy for it. About the debate of yesterday, I come to the nonviolence, and Gene Sharp, the father of nonviolence after Thoreau, said we had the focus to focus on small and specific causes that we can win. After that, we gain the trust of the people, which we don't have at the moment, really, because sometimes we give a condescending image of ourselves. We need people because we must be many to win this battle. Getting back to yesterday's topic too, there is a theory that says civil disobedience strengthens the state because it assumes that we have to obey first. However, this logic must be reversed. Politicians must understand that they are working for us. It is a social contract, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and we lay down our weapons in exchange for their legitimate violence, but it ends to be legitimate when it is unfair. So I suggest you focus on two things. In Racine, we had a principle, we give a critic and we give a proposition. So I give two propositions. We have to work to focus on public service for emancipation of citizens and freedom of expression and association for a society where life is happy. Public institutions organize from time, this is my proposition, from time to time, the year of the circus, the year of Malaysia, the year of potatoes, the year of whatever. Let us, as civil society, organize the year of freedom of expression, the year of public service, the year of emancipation, or the year of... I read the 5 major challenges in RESHAPE, the year of art and citizenship and so on. This way we can show that we can organize ourselves between civil society of all countries and become a real power, whatever, but together and collectively. And let's not give up with smile and determination. Thank you.
Thank you. I just counted that I'm going to do this 3 times more. Thank you very much. Next is Boyana Kunst. I always like to point out that her name is not a joke, it is for real, the last name Kunst. Is a philosopher and contemporary art theorist from Slovenia, based in Frankfurt. She's a full professor at the Institute for Applied Theatre Studies, and where she heads the International Master's Program in Choreography and Performance. So this stage has hosted her students already. She's from Slovenia, and the mid-generation of us can still remember her working in Ljubljana. She was not able to come due to personal reasons, but we're happy to have her on screen. She wrote a quite influential book, Artist at Work, Proximity of Art and Capitalism. Boyana, please. Boyana, sam sekundo, ker te ne slišimo. I'm very sorry. Just a second. A jaz kaj naredim tukaj spodaj, pritisnem kaj na Zoomu? To?
Test.
A je zdaj v redu? Poskusiš, Boyana, prosim.
Yes, can you hear
Super,
me?
ja.
Okay, it's working. Good, that's...
I'm sorry.
No problem, that's part of the protocol we have to go through. So
Okay.
it's not... Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm really sorry not to be there with you, and also yesterday and at the conference. I was looking very much forward, and I'm with you in my minds, and I imagine what was happening. And also thank you for the participants to make this choreography and sitting in front of the computer so that we can hear you. I would like to talk briefly. How can I say? I was actually quite anxious when I started to prepare for this, because actually we did not find a better title, and the title for me was really a kind of big, too big actually to grasp. And I think my anxiety comes also from that we would not approach those notions as a particular concept, but really to in this time we have to really think about what kind of struggles actually we are talking here. And I was thinking, like, what could be the common denominator through which I would talk briefly about that today, would be that I would approach all three notions as particular kind of struggles. And of course, for the decolonization and degrowth, I think that they have to be approached as struggles, especially to remind us on their practical dimension, that they are actually processes of struggle arising from the complex and interrelated trajectories of movements, practices of bodies and living worlds, which can also have strong conceptual consequences on the poetic being in the world, but they are not concepts with which we are naming or understanding particular practices. I think practices define what they are. And if the coloniality is, as we know, a struggle with the coloniality which survives colonialism, so it is a struggle then which is not new, but it was already always present as a struggle for the access to the world which was so ruthlessly destroyed in the name of modern discovery, as Nelson Maldonado Torres writes. And I think that this is one of the ways how I would like to approach the notion of decoloniality here. So as a struggle which is going on, and which is actually a struggle with the coloniality which still lasts, and the coloniality which actually is a pattern of power which defines culture, labor, production of knowledge, and many other layers of society in which we live. If we approach to the decoloniality from this perspective, then for me degrowth has also a relation to a decolonial struggle, because it is also a way how to retain and keep an access to the world and resist the dispossession and progress-oriented temporality of modernity. So in a sense, even if it seems like a contemporary idea, it was always already there. And in this way, I think degrowth also becomes a very interesting concept in the intersection with decoloniality, because it can unsettle the liberal modes of thinking about alternatives, new ways of producing. And it is actually showing that what also Eco-Socialist Manifesto from 2017 stressed, that what is lacking in the struggle is not an alternative to this system, not the necessity of creating another possible world or new models, but also to recognize that we are the original model. And when they are writing we, they mean with this quote to the dispossessed people, indigenous communities, the environments and biospheres who are taking the biggest toll of the current climate changes. So I think this return to what was already there always proposes a kind of a shift in the proposals and production of alternatives, because instead of alternatives and continuous proposal of the new, which is also part of the way how art functions in the modern world, we need a process of rearranging. And with that, I mean very concretely, that means returning the land to the disposed communities, rearranging the wealth, redistributing the resources, abolishing poverty, reimagining sufficiency, resisting catastrophism, etc. So I was thinking that only in this way the decolonization and degrowth are becoming kind of unsettling processes, and struggles which does not only exist as a kind of metaphors or on a conceptual level, do not only bring some good feelings and minimize the guilt of the ones who possessed most of the wealth. And this rearrangement happens on many different plans. Of course, it can happen inside the academia, cultural practice, economy, etc. But it happens only if it is understood as a part of historical process which already goes on, even if it is continuously silenced, erased, forgotten, cancerated, etc. So I would like to say that both of the processes are actually unsettling the very foundations which are actually enabling us to be part of the struggles. And that's why I would say it is not enough to just repair. We have to rearrange and redistribute and share in the world which is more than human. Now, the third word from our title comes inside. This is art. Because when we think about art, we usually connect struggle with the life of the artist, but not with art. And this is maybe the first intersection between these three notions. When we bring them together, we must also approach art field as a struggle, a particular form of movement, a struggle of bodies and thoughts, a struggle for life. And I was thinking about a quote from a poet, A.M. César, who wrote in the 50s, in the middle of the colonization processes, about poetics as a struggle for the non-impoverished access to the world. And maybe this description of poetics can also work at the intersection of all three notions, already existing and in an ongoing struggle for non-impoverished access to the world. He wrote about that when he was writing how poetics entangles with the imagination. And for him, this imagination is not so much related to the new trajectory or to projection of a new world, but to a political and poetical uprising, sensual, embodied, spiritual. In this sense, art becomes a struggle, a movement, a practice, especially when unveiling a different world from its colonial history, and with this unsettling its own institutional gravity, when trying to exist its colonial architecture and setting, transform its institutional background and economic structures. So there is really a kind of a shift in gravity happening because this process in the art unsettles the very values on which it has been built. And here arts connects to decolonization and to the decoloniality and to the growth, because it has to unsettle actually the values of property, authorship, possession, land, cultural, temporal privilege, value, knowledge, and other definitions, which are very much connected also to the understanding of arts autonomy, etc., etc. So to conclude, because I just want to give a kind of a introduction into the discussion, I would just like to say where we can find these main art struggles today, which can be read at the intersection of decoloniality and degrowth. And maybe we can then touch them separately in our discussion. Like those struggles can be, by example, found in the demands for the restitution, return, and repatriation of plundered objects belonging to the colonized communities. So this would be one struggle which we could relate to, or they are part of the restitution of land and wealth belonging to the dispossessed native communities, like land acknowledgements, which are happening in some processes of restitution among native communities and museums in the States, or they can be struggles as part of the resistance to gentrification and dispossession processes of cultural industry, which is taking away the right to develop sufficient and equal modes of living in the cities, where cultural living is rather guided through an excess. Or they can be also part of the struggles against the sensory deprivation, standardization, and desertion of land, which are connected to some ecofeminist shifts in the art and community organizing. But there are also struggles against projective and temporal acceleration of cultural production, especially with the ways how it is causing precarity of its agents, and our struggles for protection and shelter against the dispossession of life, which often resides in the gray zones of legality. And probably you were also talking a little bit about that yesterday. And through all these struggles, I think there is this kind of poetic struggle. It connects them together. And this is what I mean as a struggle for non-impoverished access to the world, in the sense of reclaiming the stories about nature, life, death, atmosphere, plants, sexuality, bodies, and open them to the access, which would be actually really addressing these traces of coloniality, which is still this coloniality which still lasts, and it's in all our system. And all these processes at least attempt to change the very notion of the value of art praxis, which in modern history mostly becomes a value when detached from the world, related to the authorship, possession, ownership, and in this impoverished way, referring back to the world. So that would be maybe for the start, and then we can talk further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Boyana. So next on the panel is Rafat Maizuba. He's also with us on screen. I think the reason he could not come is sort of a symptom when we talk about the title of today's debate, but nevertheless. He is an architect, an artist, and a writer from Lebanon. He positions his work at the intersection of politics, intimacy, and future casting, exploring fiction as a tool for individual and collective agency and an arena for the construction of new worlds. He's the founding director of the CAN, the Arab Association for Prototyping Cultural Practices. You can check the CAN on Instagram. And the editor-in-chief of the Dongola Architecture Series and the part-time lecturer at the Architecture and Design Department of the American University of Beirut. Please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Again, I'm also sorry for not being there, different reasons, but same connection. And I think that I'd like to, there's two things that I'm gonna do. One is that usually when I'm listening to someone speak, I like to also read what they're saying. So what I'm gonna do is share my screen as I read. And what I'm also doing is sharing the link where another hobby of mine is just sharing text for people to collaborate on. So it's a Google Doc with the link. You can go in and add notes and change and edit. And I would love it if this could become something else. So if I may share my screen. And I'm happily much smaller on the big screen, so that's good. So I'm gonna go ahead. You can hear me, right? Yes, cool. So I'm gonna start by reflecting on the title of the conversation. Certain things need to be said if one is to avoid falsifying the problem. In a sense, I find it very interesting that we're starting from the premise that things are unsaid. That there is a margin, even in conversations about decolonization, liberation, degrowth, and revolution. And that if I understand correctly, this evening we would tackle the perpetual reproduction of the other, and that we would speak what needs to be said, even if it is not completely verifiable, even if it is not complete, and to speculate beyond the problem. By the way, here, I find it interesting because Adel, when you were talking, when your first statement was, we need to start making our own mistakes. I fell in love with it because I thought you said we need to start making our own mysteries. And I agree with both. Like, I think we need to make our own mistakes. I think we need to make our own mysteries. And this is kind of like something that I'm curious about. So I just wanted to share that. So I apologize when I seem to digress from relating to the art or the art world, but as an artist and from that economy, the points that I try to think of and make do not separate the framework of my life from my site of labor. And I can speak about examples from my work throughout our conversation later, but I would like to contribute two strands of inquiry in response to the intersection between decolonization and degrowth. The first is that problems and solutions are colonial frameworks, and that to decolonize, we must stop finding problems or try to solve them. And second, that we need to attack the illusion of scarcity as a crucial platform to think about growth, degrowth, the fruit of our being, and our modes of sustenance. I'm very intrigued by the notion of problems and problem solving. From a young age, we encounter topics as problems and are trained to develop our problem solving skills. We solve problems between our parents and then solve math problems and later grow to solve our body image, social performance, and then pick a graduate education whose disciplines would be relevant to solve the world problems. And then aim to break free from our social anchors, peg the patriarchy, tax the rich, and continue to metabolize breaking news and pressing topics until we die. And like the world around it, the art world perpetuates urgency. It positions itself as a site of action, where things must happen now, where things can be unpacked, where things must be unpacked now. And I think of this urgency as an aquarium where these 2 points of inquiry breed. Urgency creates a place where problems become the center, and all our resources, must be deployed in service of its solutions. In a sense, we end up seeming like we're validating the nodes that we're passionate about digressing outwards and away from. The topic in the art world becomes more important than the artist. Like the cause on the streets becomes more important than the people. And we make room for sacrifice. In my budget sheet, it becomes accepted by you and I that the cost of my artwork comes at the cost of me making it. And that for a revolution to succeed, it needs to be bloody. You and I accept that my hunger and your death are legitimate modes of being. As problem solvers, we're automatically outsiders. And certain things that need to be said can remain within the comfortable terrain of the margin. The facility of me speaking to you this evening from the discomfort of my home because of failure to obtain a visa is an extension of our colonization. The imagined construct of moving forward and that this is fine is kind of a built-in mentality to achieve, to continue. And it may take complete collapse for this to be realized. For example, it is now an insult to tell someone Lebanese that they're resilient. Growth and resourcefulness are a curse inside and outside the art world. And I believe that to avoid to falsify the problem, we may need to trace the roots and the patterns of these structures outside rather than in. And for me, the outside I usually consult is fiction. To think outside existing paradigms and problems, to imagine conversations outside of judgment and education outside of competition, and to acknowledge that resource scarcity is a song of the colonizer to make the colonized just cycle harder. It is a fiction that can be disregarded towards other fictions written together, less about urgency and more about desire. Not competition, but resource management, not to solve, but to build. And I hope this sparks something. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Aida Pistotnik is a researcher and project manager at Association Ena Banda. She holds a Master of Science in Political Science, and she currently cooperates as a consultant with the Zoe Institute for Future Fit Economics, where she is developing mechanism for monitoring European Green Deal. She is a part of the international degrowth community and international movement for financial justice and debt relief. And in the frame of that, she pursues the possibility for opening and creating space for alternative proposals and more radical policies also in Slovenia. We know Aida not only because she is a prominent voice of degrowth in Slovenia, also because in the frame of Ena Banda Association, they were organizing a series of talks just here in the neighborhood, and later essays also about current topics, and experimented with new concepts for a different and more just society, and include forward thinking in the radical female thinkers and researchers. She also wrote a piece on decolonization of our imaginaries of progress and future. We make the switch.
Hi, everybody. Do you hear me, Boyana and Rafat? Yeah? Great. So, hi, thank you for inviting me, Alma. It's a pleasure to be here, pleasure to be at the last day of the last conference of the project. It's exciting, and it was also very good to hear other dimensions or other perspectives, actually, how to think or see degrowth as such. I will be mostly talking about degrowth, so my focus will be mostly on degrowth, even though that the...
I hear you very badly.
I am. Yeah? Okay. So let's hope now it works. Mostly I will be focusing on degrowth, as this is my strong background, so I'm not so much coming from art world, even though that I guess these narratives are super important, especially in a sense of developing all sorts of myths and stories that we need, especially for a new imaginary. To start my introduction, maybe focusing on degrowth, as I said, but basically what are my insights or understanding of the phenomena, especially what does it stand for, and what does it actually represent. As you already heard, it's mostly coming from the movements. But this is not just about movements. Obviously, it also develops in the academia world, and there are all sorts of like scientific papers written. I will talk about it a bit later on. But actually, as being part of the, let's say, being part of the international degrowth movement, firstly as an observer and then being much more active during the years, I was also very much involved in the so-called biennial degrowth conference in Budapest in 2016. That was actually the first conference that was held as an international conference on the periphery, compared to all the rest of the conferences mostly held in the, let's say, more central or Western European parts, meaning from Paris in 2008 and so on to Venice and Barcelona and so on. Actually what I firstly came up with the term, I firstly heard about it when I was actually living for quite some time in Copenhagen. That was in 2009. I heard it for the first time actually at the so-called Alternative Forum. This was the Alternative Forum that was happening parallelly to the UN Climate Summit. So this parallel forum was actually about a lot of discussions about current climate affairs or environmental crisis, or on the other hand also about, of course, social inequality. You can imagine, you know, what these roundtables at the forum were about. But obviously, on the other hand, at the UN Climate Summit, already in 2009, even it was obviously that the climate crisis is happening and something must be done. Not much happened, except of the protests outside of the summit. So actually nowadays, more than 10 years later, we are actually talking not just about the climate change, but actually we turned it into the climate breakdown. Some people are actually talking about it in that terms. So what I was fascinated at the forum at the time was really, it was some kind of special place from people coming from all over the globe talking about alternatives. The alternatives that at the time I was thinking, yeah, why I didn't think about this? I mean, why I never thought about, you know, criticizing economic growth as such. I mean, of course, it's very easy to criticize capitalism, because actually what is capitalism is a ghost everywhere. But, you know, economical growth, economic growth as such, I mean, is something very, very physical. Actually, it's counting, it's accountant. I mean, it's being as a service. So we are talking about something very specific here. So it's economic growth, you know, can you remember maybe how many times did you hear it, like in the last days or in the last week? I mean, just the word, the term economic growth or its main indicator, GDP. I mean, actually, we are a civilization of economic growth. It's actually our norm of living. It's also our imaginary, basically. So we are very, very limited also in our minds, you know, what is actually beyond it. And here actually degrowth comes into the play. It's not just about criticizing what is out there as a phenomena of economic growth, also as a society that is organized by certain, you know, rules. But also on the other hand, is degrowth as such is also very strong, and that's why I really was interested about it and want to know and want to learn much more about it, is because it also offers all sorts of, we can say, alternatives or proposals. There are all sorts of practices or even strategies that can be also, you know, translated into political proposals or political strategies, of course. What is really about what economic growth as such, as a system, basically, because this is a system. It's a structured system, and what is really about how, what do we even know, even though that we are bombarded by it like every day, you know, through media and news, do we really know what it is all about? You know, what is its key indicator GDP actually measures? And when I started to think in that way, then actually you figure it out that economic growth means increase of outputs and outputs of products and services, and it's counting. And obviously nowadays we can observe that it has negative impacts on our lives, society, environment, and so on. But its main indicator, GDP, so as said, is counting products and services. So more we produce, or more you produce, or more we consume on the other side, basically, the bigger is the GDP, because we are just counting. And this is actually very absurd, because this is leading how the world is run nowadays. It's not just the way or how the world is run, but actually this is determined of, are we developed or not? Are we having a progress as a society or not? So this absurd counting of GDP as the main indicator of the economic growth actually tell us how good are we doing. So are we doing good? So basically, it comes to such an absurdity that basically, if you transfer your money to my bank account, and you know, for a joke, I transfer it back, and actually in reality, nothing happened. But at the end of the day, that was counted as an economic transaction, as economic activity. So that also contributes to the economic growth as such. So, okay. To stop about this economic growth, which is for itself very, you know, fascinating phenomena, obviously, and that needs its own focus. But yeah, obviously, the growth is about the critique of economic growth, the critique of its main indicator, and therefore it also trying to imagine what is beyond, not just what is beyond, but actually how to measure things. So basically, one of the key questions for degrowth is how can our civilization live? What does this, how can we live within our planetary boundaries? And how far and how well we can live in sense of decent living. And also on the other hand, we have to understand that when we are talking about well-being or good living or decent living, on the other hand, GDP doesn't differentiate between good and bad economic activities. So it counts the same. Good activities, good economic activities, like I'm buying a bike or an ice cream, buying a book, or states invest in, education, healthcare, and so on. Or on the other hand, bad economic activities, like oil spills, pollution, and so on. And we have to be aware that actually a lot of things that are happening in a society are not counted in. For instance, volunteer work. Volunteer work is very, very spread here in Slovenia, but volunteer work does not count as, is not counted in GDP. On the other hand, we have a phenomena that is maybe not so much a phenomena anymore, but unpaid work. So for instance, how many times you wash your dishes and so on. So this also is not counted in. And on the other hand, we all, are taking care of the parents or the neighbors or our children and so on. So I'm talking about care work, and also care work here, it's not counted in. So all these things are actually ignored by the system run by economic growth. And also what is ignored are ecosystem, let's say, services. But by services here, I mean like trees making oxygen, or bees pollination, and so on. So on the other hand, please don't forget that actually economic growth implies that GDP is the only measure of progress, development, and social welfare. So, I'm kind of long, huh? Okay. Yeah, you can see it's easy for me to talk about degrowth. So, what I'm trying to say is here, can we imagine basically, can we escape this imaginary? Can we actually think of hypotheses like degrowth is offering one, that, how can we downscale our economic activities? Can we actually transform richer economies into zero carbon societies? Because this is definitely needed and desirable. We have a target to reach that is, 55% less of the emissions until 2030 and being on zero until 2050. So how our economies who are producing, and by producing, I also mean that with the higher GDP grows also are also growing the CO2 emissions. So basically these two things come very much together. Just maybe to mention, so basically just, I have to sum up, I guess, shortly. So definitely degrowth is gaining ground. It is gaining more and more mainstream attention. But still, on the other hand, the mainstream is offering us, for instance, sustainable development goals, or is offering us European Green Deal. But all these things, again, we have to ask ourselves how this will be measured. And degrowth here calls not for the GDP, but actually, on the one hand, how can we fulfill our living within planetary boundaries, meaning, decreasing CO2 emissions, decreasing our pollution. And on the other hand, at the same time, and that is also a phenomena of degrowth, that actually is thinking on the one hand about the planetary boundaries, and on the other hand, actually about the let's say, social inequality, access to healthcare, access to energy, and so on. So it's about the social thresholds as well. So all these things, when they come together, then actually we will know how well do we live. So I just finished here.
Thank you. I think we've had 4 interventions, and if there are any questions, we are ready to take them. Oh, the first one is here. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Boyana, Rafat, and everybody on the table for the interesting steering. I have like some mixed emotions. I don't know if there is.
Do you hear her?
Is there
Sorry.
space for emotions? No.
Just a second.
I should assume.
Sorry, Amanda, I'm sorry, but Boyana and Rafat cannot hear you.
Oh.
So I'm not sure, but I would propose, if you don't
Maybe you
mind,
can-
just to come here.
Or maybe you can summarize, no?
Okay,
No?
I'll try.
I
But
have
maybe
to-
if you can come here so they can hear you, no?
Gives you
Sorry.
some work.
This one, no. This is not.
No, you speak to this microphone. And you do it. Sorry. This is how we do it today.
Yes. Yeah. I have mixed emotions. And I was asking, is this a place for emotions? And what is in which way emotions are thoughts that are being sensed, that are in the process of being sensed. But first of all, I appreciate a lot, this effort, and that we are so many in the audience, and that this is really a successful conference, because it's not always the case that there is people in these such things, and I appreciate very much the whole context. But I hear, we are talking about decoloniality, and I hear, first that we do the normal things, like quote Foucault, okay, we did that. But even though we are, we probably have, in our places, other people, other forms of thought that we could also bring into the table. But we do this thing, of course, nothing against Foucault, but we do the things like that. We quote Foucault. Then there is some experts. I'm very happy that Rafat is here. I wonder, and I appreciate so much, Boyana, your analysis is very deep, but I wonder, how long. Who is going to talk about decolonization? From which perspective, and in which way this discourse is also being in some way appropriated, and as everything, as the European Green Deal means lithium, and lithium is not a green resource. And it comes from the earth, and it comes from Chile, or the places where I have been, and which are dear for me, but also from Belgrade in the future, from Serbia, So it's so complex to talk about these issues, and it's so strong the falling into this, into these traps that are fictions, like assuming that we can understand each other's perspective, assuming that what for some people is green, for other people mean the destruction of the environments, assuming that if we reproduce the structures of power of academia and quote certain things and invite certain experts, we are somehow producing something different. I don't know, I'm very confused. and I dare to be confused, because Rafat also opened space for that kind of, thinking. I don't say that your talk was confused, but there was a lot of body in there. Thank you.
Do any of you 4 maybe want to respond?
I think you have more than 2 emotions.
We can't hear you.
Please.
I think that you have more than two emotions. That's why the confusion. But I don't know if I answer, but it's not easy to speak about decolonization because we are not speak here, because we are not speak about the same colonization. We have a lack of definitions, and maybe we have to work on it artistically or in the field of research, anthropology, sociology, psychology, and architecture, and so on. So it's difficult to speak about things that we have not the same representation. It's not what we want, but it's only to know when someone speaks about decolonization from one context, we can see somehow the same, not the same, but the image that he has in his mind. So we can speak a lot, but if we are not agree about the definition, the representation, the perception, before we cannot go forward, I think. So degrowth, decolonization, degrowth, we can have the same acceptance, but decolonization, it's not the same history in Chile or Mexico or Morocco or Congo or Slovenia or so what we can do, a year of decolonization. I think that it's and I'll finish with this, I think that it's a battle. We are in context in everywhere in our countries, and we are civil society and we want to be a counterpower, but we have no power because there are some funders who finance us, we are not, when we say civil society in our country, we've been something like 30,000 association 20 years before. Now we are something like 200,000. And the difference is association created by government. So we put civil society of government between brackets, and we call all of us civil society. So it's why we have to speak about impact, what public, and don't, and to maybe to put a stop and to reflect on what we are doing.
Can I add something on that?
Please.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think first I appreciate the expression of confusion because when I was trying to think about what to contribute, I was feeling very pretentious in a sense because I didn't want to complicate a lot of personal baggage of the topics into the main text, but then I decided to just write, and that was what I shared. And I also want to add a little bit, I want to complicate what Adam was saying about terminology, and also wonder the opposite, because based on a lot of experiences that we've been having, at least locally, people are trying to come together to create forces in order to create change. And usually the directions of creating forces is for people to come together, and coming together requires a lot of agreement. And one of the things to consider is the fact that maybe our colonizations are different, and we don't need to subscribe to a terminology that needs to be unified, but to kind of be able to complement and understand the diversity of the struggle. And like this, I think Boyana kind of fits in something that I'd like you to speak a little bit more about this. And it's just, how can we agree that our struggle is common, but our problems will not be? And how can we work towards something that does not need to be a union? Because I want and I think I've had this conversation a lot, it's just about, can we coexist literally rather than just sign agreements that we are talking about the same thing? And in a sense, this goes back a little bit to the question of who is saying what, can we not drag this into academia? Can we maybe not call this a round table? I mean, just to kind of unpack the site and the topics and not to make them one. And I feel like there's something about that, and I just wanted to put it out there.
Boyana, would you maybe like to follow?
You're on mute.
You have to.
Thank you very much also for all these talks and questions and the confusion. And what I think is there is something like how I wanted to grasp the confusion and anxiety of myself when I was preparing for this panel. That's why I went back to this question of struggle. And struggle, I don't mean that there is one struggle, but there is really a multiplicity and polyvalency of different struggles. And what is really interesting for me is how we somehow capable, and this is something that is very much connected back to arts, to imagine kinships between different struggles. I think that would be something very interesting, and it goes very much with that what you, Rafat, says, like how do we come together? So my anxiety is, even if I am like a skilled academic and so on, but I have very much anxiety taking this as concepts. And I think that this is a very dangerous thing coming also in the field of art, how those concepts are reappropriated as a machine and so on. And I was thinking that how to say, that's why then I said that maybe what can be connected to all these three notions, that they are, if we would then accept the art as struggle, then of course we have also a very different idea of art, because we are very in a different way of approaching art as a particular movement of bodies. And we are very much going away from values inside we also create and institutional art today. And I think that this is something what is very difficult to say when we are dealing with the decolonization processes, which are very different. But if I speak from the art perspective, there is a kind of, how to say, conceptual limit beyond we cannot think. And this conceptual limit is exactly how art was constituted in modernity as part of the modernity of colonialism, with its values, with its institutions, and so on. And this is something what for me is so interesting in that question, if we would come back to art. But now when I was thinking about that, and I was also thinking about emotions and so on, I was thinking about a book which I recently read, and which for me was a book which brought decoloniality in whatever way and degrowth in a very interesting intersectional way together. And it's a book of stories, short stories, written like a nature writing of writers, different writers in England who are having multicultural background, refugee background, and they try to write about their walks in nature, and they try to really reappropriate the whole genre, or kind of resist to the whole genre of nature writing, which is so historically familiar and so historically important, by example, for England, but it's always produced by white, male, educated men, and so on. And that's for me something very interesting. What opened up in this book, this was exactly the poetic access to the world, which came from a totally different perspective. It was very emotional. It has for me, in a kind of sensual level, a lot with Degrowth, because it gives a value to something what is not seen at all, what is not visible. And on the other side, it brings us, it demands a voice, and the voices which were never heard when we were actually thinking about nature. So I was thinking like a very concrete proposal in a very little scale, what actually can be done. But I think that this is very much connected really to these struggles, which I would really connect to the struggles around what makes works of art such as we know it, like what is the value of possession, the value of authorship, how around our institutions are organized, and so on. And that is actually also a discussion which has to be held, I think. It's part of the struggles.
Thank you. Ida, would you maybe also like to follow? Because I know you also wrote that it's not enough to be win in the battle of ideas. And
I cannot hear you again.
Yeah,
I'm just asking Ida if she would like to follow. Sorry.
I think with Rafat we can have
I'm sorry. I was just asking Ida if she would like to follow.
Hi, I will be just very short this time. I think like emotions are very important. Like they are actually a mobilizer. They could be a mobilizer, of course. They can also like passivize you, but I think the emotions are very important, especially nowadays, especially if you or we are angry, or also on the other hand, happy. But usually anger works in a sense that mobilizes people, and that's why we usually have protests afterwards. Or, you know, not just about protesting, but it's also about organizing and organizing it differently, basically, and organizing differently that, you know, especially organizing differently outside, as Rafat was basically saying at the start, and also organizing from the, let's say, so-called bottom-up approaches. And that actually means that, you know, these different shapes or maybe different shades of the system could basically work differently, but I don't see so much of the confusion. I just see the confusion that relates to a very complex system that is full of structures and actors and dynamics and levels. But on the other hand, actually, I think it's very clear. I mean, we nowadays very well know what the problem is. But on the other hand, there, as I was maybe not have so much time about talking about what actually are all sorts of alternatives that could be understood as or seen as degrowth alternatives. But, you know, how can we tackle this problem or problems? This is, I mean, we somehow know it, but still we are, you know, lacking some kind of super device that, you know, would kind of lead us somewhere that we would maybe become from angry, maybe at least a bit happy.
I know it's not very inviting to come up to have a question, but please.
It's a sportive session.
It is a choreography.
Hello, let me just take. Well, I hope I managed to make you a little bit happier, because there are good news regarding the possibility of degrowth and the possibility of having resources that are beyond financial and shared. And there is a lot of experience. I come from Brazil, and in Brazil there are many initiatives, mainly in the cultural sector, because the cultural sector is usually pioneer, where it is possible to do stuff with 15 to 25% in money, and the rest with the flow of non-monetary resources, such as knowledge, shared infrastructure, access to whatever. And this happens quite a lot because we are in context where there is a lack of everything, but a lot of creativity. And so this is well registered. One of them was a big network called Fora do Eixo. And there are initiatives in many other countries. One of them is part of FARO, who is a partner of RESHAPE in this evaluation process. Is Martadero in Bolivia, a cultural organization. It's a center, a cultural center that since 2010, does everything with a little bit of money and a lot of exchange. And this exchange and this flow is not only in resources, but also in decision-making, in power, and so on. And as well in the design of new criteria to evaluate. Because I'm a futurist, and in the future studies field, one very important point is the need to change measurement. Because unless you change the measure, we won't get anywhere. So this is an issue, and I would invite you to know the prototype of evaluation, which already focused on this kind of thing. So there is a lot of information, and you may look at peer-to-peer Wikipedia, where you can find a lot of information on degrowth and how it can be possible. So it's not a dream, it's not the future, it's the present. The only thing is that it's not enough known or communicate. And so there's hope.
Somebody else, maybe? If you're not willing to come down, you can ask the question and I will repeat it to the...
What's the name of the book?
This one? Can you say? What's the name of the book? Boyana, what is the name of the book you were telling about, the stories? Unmute, please. Gifts of Gravity and Light by... please unmute, Boyana.
Anita Roy and Pippa Marland, Gifts of Gravity and Light. I really recommend. It's really, yeah.
Okay.
And I was also thinking about degrowth and decolonialization through this metaphor today in the morning. Gifts of Gravity and Light. How can we connect this title actually to that? First, decolonization is this is maybe a kind of a too general interpretation, but if we would think from a central way, it's really a gift of gravity, because it's unsettled us. It's really unsettled us, and maybe also from that there is some light. So it's very interesting also to connect this title to that, what we are discussing on a more central and metaphorical level. But that's my interpretation.
Mm-hmm. If there are no further questions, I think our time is up anyway. Oh, there are, please. Do you want to?
Yeah, we'll go there again.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I'm very sorry. I will just say it very openly because I think I don't have nothing to lose. This is great.
I really wonder, how do we give up our spaces? And how that is decolonial, or spaces of power, or spaces of legitimization, and how when we do that, we allow for really other places to emerge. And I find very great, that this happened, and I'm great that Rafat is talking, and he's talking from another perspective, but I wonder, if we are afraid of concepts, then let people talk who feel and have the experience, so that we don't create concepts and that we don't appropriate the experience of others. And we listen to what they have to say in relation to these struggles in order to learn and leave our places for a moment in order to give space. I think that is a practice of decolonization and of listening.
I agree.
Me too.
Yeah. And I thank you for your intervention. Do you want to conclude, Rafat, Boyana?
I think we should continue to, maybe not to talk, but to really meet and exchange on a continuous basis on that. It's a very short, but I think it's a very, what I like, it's a very challenging way and to bring these two concepts together. Because what they also show is the immense, this we did not touch today, but the immense incommensurability between different contexts, which are like by example, in the concepts of degrowth, there are very different contexts in the way how degrowth can also work in the relation to the colonial traces and history of that territories. So I think this incommensurability we did not touch, and probably it also comes back from Amanda's comment that we are already in the situation when we start to talk about that which is incommensurable. And maybe that should need to start at the beginning. And, but we can meet to the end, so that's also a very good point.
Yeah. I think it's also a nice concluding thought. I think we're left with anxiety and with confusion and with mistakes. And I invite you all to continue the debate further. Now we have one last act to do. I invite Tamara and Milica to the stage. Not to say goodbye, but to say sort of a conclusion.
But first, we'll give you an applause.
You will be here. Boyana and Rafat, at this point, probably we have to say goodbye because there is two of them speaking and they will conclude the conference. So we wave goodbye to you.
Bye.
So, yeah, I'll just say it again for those that haven't heard it in the beginning. My name is Milica Ilic. I coordinated this project for the last 3 years. So what we're going to do now is just take a few of your minutes to end this ending conference of this project that we worked on for the past years. So it's a beautiful moment and it's an emotional moment, and I think I want to take it to thank again all of you who have been involved in this process, whatever role you may have been performing in the process, and thank you for the time and the energy and the passion that you put into this project. It was quite a ride. It was sometimes a very bumpy ride. It was also an inspirational ride. So I really want to share my appreciation and also maybe say how much it was inspirational for me, and hopefully it was for you also. A special thanks also to those that we met along the way. We went through our various trajectories in different ways, and we touched a lot of people and a lot of different contexts, and that was quite inspirational too. Anyway, I have a problem with endings. Some of you here know that that's a struggle to close chapters. Especially professionally. But beside my dislike of endings, I think in a project like this, in particular in a project like this, I don't think that we should talk about endings. This is more, perhaps it's more appropriate to talk about other beginnings or new beginnings. I hope that some of the things that you have witnessed and participated in and heard in the last years or in the last days would inspire you to go along new beginnings. And maybe it's about continuing the thinking that was initiated and carried on throughout this project. And maybe it's about the tools or some of the concrete ideas that come out of it. Or maybe it's about the encounters that the project facilitated. But hopefully a new beginning or new beginnings would emerge out of all this. So thank you very much for being here.
Of course, I wanted to thank also, first of all, I wanted to thank you for leading so graciously this very complex, I think, and very demanding project. There were so many voices in it, so many of us that had different ideas and different bumps on the road, but you did manage to drive us through them. So thanks a lot, Milica, for that. But also to all the partners, all the reshapers, all the advisors, all the facilitators, and everyone from Bunker family and Star Elektrarna crew, the financiers, everyone who made this conference here happen. It was really good. This one was a struggle, but we did it too. Thank you, Alma, and all the people who were speakers here. This was not an easy task to do. Thanks a lot again. Thank you. So we are really concluding now. It's the last evening of this part of the conference, but there are some beautiful things awaiting us. Today there are artistic dinners, and I would like all of you to be here at 8 o'clock. We will take you to different locations for the dinners, so when we finish this, we go outside, have a drink, can talk, so on. But at 8 o'clock we will take you to different locations, so please be here. Tomorrow there is a RESHAPE picnic. We are starting at 10 o'clock sharp in front of the hotel, so please be there. It will be a beautiful day, and then we are returning here at 7 to take part or experience the Hoppla wir leben, which is I don't remember the English word for it, almost like an installation by the Collective Beton Ltd. And now, to finish in RESHAPE style, and to part in RESHAPE style as well. I would like to invite to the stage Peter Dluchi and Ingrid Franken, and I give you the stage.
Yeah, RESHAPE style. So because Milica doesn't like endings, we have the task to end this with a tiny ritual. And so how we're going to do it, it's a ritual in 2 parts. It is both very easy and very difficult. So we will explain to you what the parts are, and then we come back in this space with you, and then we do it, okay? The first part of the ritual is a score by Paulina Oliveros. And we thought of doing this score with you because the score is about listening. And we felt like this whole process has been a lot about listening to each other, listening to the different places that we visited, listening to the field, listening to panels, listening to ourselves also at some moments. So this score is about listening in and listening out at the same time. And the score will go as follows. We will listen in, and we don't do it now, we will do it later, but I will explain you now already. We listen in, and any sound that needs to come out can come out. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It can be beautiful. There is no judgment. It can be soft, it can be very loud, whatever. And at the same time as we are producing the sound that we hear on the inside, we will be listening to the sound, to our collective sound, and try to attune to it. And this whole score will take 2 breaths. So we will breathe in once, produce sound, listen to the sound, inside, outside, attune. We will breathe in a second time. The same goes on, and that's it. Yeah? Yes?
And for the second part of the ritual, at the beginning, you got your small envelopes with the papers. I hope you all have them.
Does anyone not have it? Okay.
There are 3 people over there.
People? Okay, I will go and get some more while you explain.
And the idea is when we finish the score, our collective performance, you will think of one word that was somehow present for you during the process, during the conference, some word that got under your skin and that somehow transformed some way of how you think. And you would write it down on the paper, you would put it in the envelope, and then you would put it someone which is to the left of you as a gift. And the gift is supposed to be unveiled and read only when you are leaving Ljubljana, when you are leaving the conference, or when are you finishing your last work related to the conference and going back home, or when you are on the plane. So this is the time when you will read the gift of others. It's also the act of releasing and sharing. And I really hope that we will manage to make it happen, that after the session, each of us has an envelope and each of us gave an envelope to someone else. I guess if we fail, it would be a big failure for the whole project, not to kind of make this simple task as a collective. So I really hope we manage to do it. Yeah.
And we suggest to do this while we see each other. So the people who are more in the front, maybe turn around, you can stand up, you can sit, but that we kind of face the center together, since we couldn't make a circle on this stage. Yeah, let's do it.